Welcome to Insight Builder channel, large language model automators, Python experts, and my dear friends, GPT Assistant and User Proxy Agent, building block of agents explained. Before we dive into the video, I'm going to explain to you the objective of a series of videos that I'm going to make, the deep dive into Autogen and LLM Assist. If you're a new developer who wants to enter into the field of agents, large language models, and you are looking to understand Autogen and start developing around it, this series of videos are going to be a great help for you. If you're a layman or a business leader who is trying to see how this Autogen and the various assistant that has been developed by the open source as well as the OpenAI organization, if you want to understand these ideas also, then the videos will be of great help. Before we move forward, we have to first of all understand what is Autogen. If you visit their GitHub repo, which we'll do pretty frequently in this series of videos, you will see that Autogen it's a Python package that wraps around the assistants, the tools, retrievers, and functions. The assistants that I'm talking about is the large language model, artificial intelligence model. The Autogen does not stop with the single modal models. It works with multimodal models like Lava, and it also integrates with vector DBs like Quadrant and ChromaDB. It also works with the retrieval logic. Apart from this, it takes care of many challenges that the developers face when you are working with multiple large language models. All these things are taken care of. In this video, what we are going to do is we are going to primarily discuss on the user proxy agent and the GPT assistant. That is going to be our primary objective. Let's zoom out a bit so that you guys can see an overview of what we are going to do. So there are two major moving parts. One is the OpenAI assistant that you're seeing here. It has its own subparts. And then we have the Autogen user proxy agent, which has its own methods that interface with the GPT assistant object. This is how the implementation has been done, and we'll be walking through a code demo right now. As you can see here, there are two different things that are involved here. There are two entirely different domains, in fact. So OpenAI assistant is inside the OpenAI organization, and they have provided a API with which we can work with the assistant that they have released. On the other hand, the user proxy agent is inside the Autogen library. This user proxy agent it's a class, Python class that has been written to work along with the assistant, along with GPT assistant. GPT assistant is nothing but the OpenAI assistant. Yes, you heard me right. GPT assistant is nothing but OpenAI assistant. We'll be seeing this in more detail as we go through the code walkthrough. Let's now dive into the code walkthrough. The notebook that you're seeing in front of you will be shared with you through the GitHub repo. The GitHub repo, I'll be providing you the link that has been forked from the Autogen repo itself. The reason why I forked the Autogen repo itself is because in the future, as we go into the various videos, I'll be referring to the code inside the repository. Understanding what is happening inside the Python files that are creating these classes, methods, and functions is going to be very crucial if you're going to develop based on Autogen or based on the large language model, OpenAI assistant, etc. I usually prefer working with the documentation, but after working with documentation for various Python libraries, almost some 20 to 25 different Python libraries, I have already looked at the documentation and made lots of videos. You can take a look at the playlist in my YouTube channel. What I found is that the documentation is good. However, Just following the documentation is not going to give you the edge that you get when you dive into the code itself. When you dive into the code, you will get to learn a lot more about the logic that developers have created. And on top of it, you will also try to learn how how to implement your own logic. I'll be going through each of these things step by step so that you guys can understand what's going on. After I run through the code, I will also show you how the assistant is created in OpenAI. Following that, I'll be discussing how to look at these the backend details from OpenAI inside the notebook itself. So all these things we will be discussing in this video. So stay tuned till the end. Config list can be created in multiple ways. I am going to prefer the .env file creation. Inside the .env, there will be multiple OpenAI API keys. So you can see that here, and I will have Hugging Face keys also. Also, these OpenAI API keys, Hugging Face keys can be interfaced with various models. The models that I am referring to can be open source models like Llama 2 or CodeLlama, or it can be closed source like GPT 3.5 Turbo and GPT 4. What I would suggest is follow along with this video as I am explaining and try to run the cells inside your Jupyter Notebook environment and see the output. That is very crucial. So you can see that once I run this particular cell, I am getting this output. And no wonder I am not showing the actual OpenAI API key. In the backend, I have modified the .env file so that the placeholder OpenAI API key is only visible here. So you don't need to worry about it. You can tweak the .env file, and the .env file that I am using is not shared in the GitHub repo. So that has been git ignored. Nowadays, it's so easy to lose your key that it becomes imperative that you understand how these things are working, how to safeguard your key. I have used the .env library. You have to import the .env library using pip install python -.env. That is how you will be able to use this particular line. If you are not able to import this, then the rest of the code will not work. So keep that in mind. Now the first cell is completed. I'm going to move to the next cell. So here I am further trying to explore about the model API key map. So this is a new parameter that is entering into the config list method that you are seeing here. You can already see that I have something called as CodeLlama, and inside the CodeLlama I have the API type, the API key environmental variable, I have the API version and the base URL. So this is the base URL from which the generation can happen. More detail about CodeLlama execution and integrating CodeLlama with Autogen will be done in the next video. So stay tuned for that. In this video, I'm just giving you we can filter the models, and we can use only certain models for a particular config list. You might be already wondering, but you are showing me the config list, Kamal, but where are we going to use it? So stay tuned for that. Understanding the basics or understanding how the components work is more important than understanding how the bigger parts start working. So you can see the output here. Here you see that I am only able to see the CodeLlama GPT 3.5 Turbo and the CodeLlama 2 API. The rest of the API keys, if I remove this particular model from here, and if I execute this code again, earlier you saw there was CodeLlama details, but now you see only GPT 3.5 Turbo details. This is how the config list works. I'm importing the assistant agent, user proxy agent, and this is important. I am importing the GPT assistant agent from agent chat contrib. So this is the folder agent chat. Inside agent chat there will be contrib, and inside contrib there will be a file called as GPT assistant agent.py, and from that file I am importing GPT assistant agent. How do I know all these things? When you are trying to work with new Python excuse me, when you are trying to work with new Python libraries, it is always better to look at their code base. If you go into Autogen folder, inside the Autogen folder you will find various other folders. You have to enter into agent chat, and you have to go into contrib, and inside contrib you will find various agents that is already created by Microsoft. If you take a look at each of these agents, so now let us dive into GPT assistant agent. This is the agent that we are going to use, and I want you guys to at least scroll through this. You don't need to even understand initially. Just scroll through the code and see whether you are able to get a gist by looking at their doc strings, looking at the arguments, looking at the parameters that is getting passed, the methods that is getting created. See whether you are able to understand the logic that is going on. In the future, as we go progress into various videos, completing this task, like going through the code base and trying to understand parts of the code base, can help you a lot. Let us now dive back into the demo. We are going to import GPT Assistant. I am right now earnestly going to start working on creating a GPT Assistant. So for that, I have to use the model GPT 3.5 Turbo 1106, because this is the model that can be used for assistant creation in OpenAI. In my OpenAI account, I can only use GPT 3.5 Turbo. I cannot use GPT-4 because it's not enabled for me. In your case, you will have GPT 4.0 also. As of now, you don't need to worry about whether you are using 3.5 or 4. Go ahead with 3.5. This is more than sufficient. So if you execute this particular code, you will see the same thing. You will see the API key and the model. As I explained a second back, that you have to review the arguments of the GPT Assistant. I have made this notebook where you can actually look at the arguments directly. So you don't need to even go and check there. You can just read it here also. Important point is that you need to give a name to the GPT Assistant, and then you need to create this LLM config. This LLM config will contain the assistant ID, the model that you are going to use, and the tools that you are going to give, and the file IDs if you are going to give anything. But hold on a moment, where am I going to get the assistant ID from, or the model from? So the model is, this is the model that you are going to use. That is already clear now. But where is the assistant ID coming from? What is this tools and what is this file ID? All these things, assistant ID, the tools and file IDs, are coming from the OpenAI side. So if you go back to this particular overview, we are right now trying to create the GPT Assistant. And this GPT Assistant is a wrapper on top of the assistant creation workflow inside OpenAI. You heard me right. It is a wrapper on the complete workflow of assistant creation. If you don't know how the assistant is created inside OpenAI, as you go forward into the various other agents and the agent interaction, you will be at complete loss. It is very important that you understand how the OpenAI assistant agent are created. Assistants are created, not agents, assistants. I have gone ahead and explored into the various prompts that has been already available for the assistant agent, as well as the default config that is available, just for you guys to understand what's. And then I have listed down about the assistant from OpenAI. So what assistants are? OpenAI assistants are helping to build applications. They leverage the models, tools, knowledge, and respond to user queries. They have three types of tools, that is code interpreter, retrieval, and function calling. These three tools are the base for a lot of agents inside Autogen. So keep this in mind. You need to understand how these tools are also created. We can use assistants and access multiple tools in parallel. So these are all some of the benefits that OpenAI has given. What we are interested is in the steps. So all the steps you see here, I will be going through the step in a couple of minutes, but all the steps are going to be done automatically by using this particular single cell. I have collapsed these two cells, which I used for explaining to you what is assistance and what is the assistance made of. After that, I am coming to this cell where I am creating the LLM config, where I am giving the LLM config list. So this GPT 3.5 config list comes from here, this GPT 3.5 config. I am using that configuration, and then I am using the assistant ID here. The reason why I'm using the assistant ID is I already have an assistant inside OpenAI. I'm using that only. And next, I am calling the model GPT 3.5 Turbo. So this is the model that I'm using. So once I do all these things, then the then the entire step of assistant creation is done by this particular class. I'm going to name the GPT assistant agent as assistant. The assistant agent default system message is the prompt or the instruction that I'm going to give. I'll be showing you the instruction also, and then the LLM config. In your case, you will not be having an assistant ID. The assistant ID will be none. If the assistant ID is none, then a new assistant will be created for you automatically when you run this cell. If you run this cell again and again with this assistant ID as none, then new assistants will be created. So where will these assistants be created? It will be created in this location. So if you go to OpenAI, inside OpenAI, you need to have an account for this. You need be able to log in into OpenAI, the backend platform, and there you will see that there is assistant, and here the assistants will be created. Right now, you see my assistants are blank because the assistant that I used to make this demo, I have deleted it. But once you execute this particular cell, you will be seeing an assistant there. Moving forward, next, what we are going to do is we are going to create a user proxy agent. So in order to create the user proxy agent, believe me, there are lots of parameters which can be pretty intimidating. If you look at the GPT assistant, there are maximum 4 to 5 parameters. But when it comes to user proxy agent, there are various things that you can control from the user proxy agent. But keep one thing in mind: understanding and reading through all these parameters are very, very crucial. Here, I used the name. I've given a name. This is given by you when you are going to create it. It can be any name. The code execution config, I am going to create a work directory called as AutoCode inside the same path where this notebook is. I am going to give is termination message. This is the function that I'm going to use. I'll be explaining why this is being done in a couple of minutes. And human input mode in case of user proxy agent is never. This is one of the settings that you need to provide. And the max consecutive auto reply is going to be 1. The suggestion that I continuously provide is to run the cell and see the output and look at the error that you're getting. Once you look at the error only, you will be able to clearly move forward and understand about that particular class or that particular function or the logic. Next, once you have done this user proxy agent, you have to connect this user proxy agent with the GPT assistant. For that, you need to initiate a chat. So this is the method that is available with the user proxy agent instant or object, and you pass the GPT assistant object. So GPT assistant object is what we created here. Let's collapse this so it will be easier for me. This is the GPT assistant that we created. We are passing it here, and the message I am going to say is that say hello to the world. The moment I create this chat and I connect with GPT assistant, what happens is the assistant gets created, and the created assistant is placed inside this object, and this particular GPT assistant can be connected using the Autogen user proxy agent. I can use send to send the messages, I can receive the messages back, and I can process the message. So all these 3 things are done locally in your machine. You can see that the user proxy agent is sending to assistant that say hello to the world, and the assistant responds. So to say hello to the world, you can simply print the string. So it is printing the string using Python code, and that is the output that has come. It is asking to run this code. It will output hello world to the console. It is printing one more time the code. This is happening because of the generation that is coming from the assistant. You'll see that after this particular response has come, there is a execution of the code block. So this particular execution happens after it receives. This is the receipt. This is the message that has been received from the assistant, and this is the execution that is happening in the local environment. So it has been inferred as Python, and the user proxy agent is now sending back to the assistant that exit code is 0, the execution succeeded, and the code output. Once the exit code 0 and the code output is seen, the assistant responds, great, the code executed successfully and printed hello world twice. It is finally saying terminate. So once this terminate string is hit, then the conversation ends. So you can see the conversation has been ended. Let us go back to the presentation. So in this brief demo, I did not use even the OpenAI API key. You might be wondering, will this work when I do it in my environment? 99%, I'm pretty sure it will work. The 1% that I'm skeptical is because there will be some or the other errors that you'll face, and that is when you will learn a lot more from this. So in order to make your life easy to debug the errors, I'm going to now enter into the OpenAI assistant creation and a bit of a background into what happens when you create an assistant. So for that, let us go to the browser again. If you go to the browser to platform openai.com and go to the documentation, and inside the documentation, you will find assistance overview. From this particular documentation, you can understand that in order to create an assistant, you can use either the assistant playground that you are seeing here. You have to just click on create, and it will ask you to give a name. It will ask you to give the instructions that you need to provide, and you need to select a model. With the assistants, you can use GPT 3.5 also. The Autogen team has suggested to use GPT 4.1106 preview only. So this becomes a challenge. If you go to the GPT assistant, this is the GPT assistant code. If you scroll down, you'll see that the model by default is given as GPT 4.1106 preview. In the notebook, I have used the LLM config. In the LLM config, I had, if you go up, I have given the model as GPT 3.5 Turbo. What will happen is, if I don't provide the model appropriately, then it will by default use the GPT-4 and it will try to create the assistant. In case if you don't have the API enabled for GPT-4 model, then this particular cell will not execute. And the error will be cryptic. You will not be able to understand why it is not working. The point here is that you need to give the model correctly, and then this particular config has to be provided in the LLM config here. Then only it will work. There are two things. That is the config list that we spoke about that decides the model and the OpenAI API keys with related details. And then there is LLM config. This LLM config is going to be, this is a configuration of the large language models itself. And the config list is part of it. So you see that the config list comes and sits inside the LLM config. And this LLM config goes and sits inside the GPT assistant. So this is how the objects are moving or the dictionaries are moving. So if you scroll up, I have looked at the assistant agent.default system message. So this assistant agent is part of Autogen. So if you walk through this instruction, just read through the instruction, because large language models are all about the instruction. And right away you can see that agents are nothing but regular large language models to which we are sending text data or text instruction, and the agents provide the feedback to us. But this text instruction contains lots of information. It is going to, if you just walk through this, let me zoom in a bit. The model is a helpful AI assistant, and it can be used to solve tasks using coding and language skills, because there is a code interpreter, so it can actually create code and we can execute the code. So in following cases, suggest the Python code. So when you need to collect info, suggest the Python code. When you need to perform some task with code, then suggest a Python code. So that is what we are instructing. So it will give a Python code in the code annotation. If we are also telling to the model that solve the task step by step. If you need to, if plan is not provided, then explain your plan first. Later, when using code, you must first indicate the script type. So this is also very important. You want the user to save the code in a file, then provide the file name. If the result indicates there is an error, fix the error. So all these things I will explain what is happening now in the output. When you find an answer, verify the answer carefully. And then reply terminate in the end of everything is done. So the idea of having the terminate is that once we go to this level, this position, it means that the agent or the assistant has has decided that, okay, whatever task that it was given has been completed. Now let us go to the output. If you go to the output, this output, the user proxy agent, that is the agent that is interfacing with the GPT assistant, is giving it a task. The assistant is coming back with the solution. So it is telling that you can simply print hello world using Python. It is giving the Python script, and then it is asking to run the code. Once the run the code is given, this particular process, this particular line is processed by the user proxy agent. We are right now going to look at the workflow of creating an assistant. To create an assistant and to start interacting with it, you need a couple of more things apart from the assistant. The thread, messages, and after that to run the assistant. So these are the steps that we need, and for that we will have to go through this series of things. And inside the OpenAI ecosystem itself, there is a library called as OpenAI Python library that you can install using pip install OpenAI. Ensure that it is a recent OpenAI version 1.31, I suppose. You need to use that, and inside that only, in that library only, you will have the client.beta.assistant. If you are having an earlier version of OpenAI library, then you will not have beta.assistant, and that also will lead to failure of this particular cell. So there are a couple of things. You need to ensure that the correct model is provided here. You need to ensure that you have the correct OpenAI library installed in your system, and you need to also have the OpenAI key, the assistant ID, etc. also available. All these things can actually break this particular cell. Once you do this particular step, you can create the assistant using that particular create endpoint. After you create the assistant, you need to create a thread. Thread is basically a data structure that holds the messages. There are other methods that are riding on top of thread that is going to help us. Next, we have to create a message thread. Each message thread can contain the information that you want, as you can see here, and it can contain the role, and it also needs to contain a thread ID because the message has to sit inside a thread. So that's why you need to provide a thread ID. Once you do that, you can actually list the messages, and then once the thread is filled with the messages, then you can run the assistant on top of the thread. That is where this comes. So you can see on top of threads, you are going to run and create a run. To create a run, you need the assistant ID, you need the thread ID, and the instruction. So this is the instruction that we are providing here. The instruction that we reviewed quite some time back. So this is the instruction that we are going to provide here. And the same thing happens when you are going to use this particular interface also. After you have created the run, you can check the run status using the runs.retrieve. You need to provide the thread ID. You can display the assistant's response using the messages.list, and you can check the message output. Now the question here is, the reason why we went into the entire process is to show you that the same thing of creating the assistant and the run, creating the thread, messages, etc. is done automatically inside GPTAssistant. So how am I saying that this is done? For that, we are going to go into the code base again. Go to the code base. Inside the GPTAssistant, you can immediately see that here you can see the OpenAI Client beta assistants.create. So this is the same method that you see here, client beta assistants create. So inside the Autogen, GPT assistant agent is basically a wrapper on top of the OpenAI client, and they automate the process of creating the assistants, and it can use the retrieval process to retrieve the assistant ID, and on top of it, it can start creating the threads, and it can start interacting with the ID and invoke the assistant. So you can see there is an invoke assistant method which sends the messages, and there is a configuration for that also. all these things are done automatically. We are not even touching it. So you can see that the thread is getting created here, and the thread ID is automatically retrieved. You can take a look at the thread ID. I will be showing you how to do that in a couple of minutes. And here is a message getting created, and once a message gets created, it goes into thread ID, and then here is a runs that is getting created, and after that you will see that it is getting the response and it reverts back. So you saw that by understanding the overview, by understanding both the overviews, like now you know what happens inside the GPT assistant agent, and you know what is happening here also. And next, we have seen that this particular GPT assistant is used inside the GPT. We are used inside the Autogen user proxy agent. Next, you need to understand that what happens in Autogen user proxy agent, how it is sending and how it is receiving and how it is processing the message. So you saw the drift, right? Just only going through the documentation is one thing, but once you look at the code and once you understand the logic behind it, it is really powerful. And if you are facing any errors also, you can recover from the error very easily. Most of us, when we are trying to work with new libraries, when we face an error, we cannot proceed further. The reason is that we don't understand what is going on behind the scenes, and we cannot just like that edit the code and recover from the error. Once you understand the background processes, like the way I'm explaining, it will be way more easier for you to do that process. Let us go back to the code base, the main agent chat directory. Inside the agent chat directory, you will see conversable agent, you will see assistant agent, and you will see user proxy agent. So the user proxy agent that we are working comes from this location only. So if you click on user proxy agent, you'll see that there is a class called UserProxyAgent, and under that you'll see there are lots of parameters that is required for initialization. But to your surprise, you'll see that the class ends. It's a very if you're new to Python coding, you'll be immediately surprised that how come there can be a class that is so powerful but it's just ending in less than 80 lines. That is because the main agent that we are working is actually called as conversable agent, and this conversable agent class is available at the same level as user proxy agent. So I'm going to go back to agent chat, and in agent chat you will see there is conversable agent. This particular script contains all the methods that it is used for working with these Autogen user proxy agent with GPT assistant. If you go here, you'll see that the same init messages, init parameters are there, the same parameter explanations, but this time you will see that there is a lot more methods and lot more functions that are coming up. If you go here, you can see the classes, and inside the classes you can see the various functions, and you can scroll through this and you will see there is a send, there is a receive, there is an initiate chat, and also there is generate OAI reply. Then we have also can execute function. So these execute function and can execute function, these are the things that are helping to process the reply that we get from the OpenAI assistant. We have seen the entire steps right now. So I showed you how the methods from the Autogen user proxy agent are interacting with the GPT assistant. But I have not still told you one thing. So if I am telling that GPT assistant is creating the OpenAI assistant, after you execute the GPT assistant cell, so if I go up and after I execute this GPT assistant agent, that means I should be able to get the assistant ID using the OpenAI libraries also, correct? So that is what I'll be showing you in next couple of minutes. So I'm going to collapse this. Also, there is one more example that I've collapsed here. Now we are going to check what has happened inside the OpenAI. So if you go and look at the GPT assistant.assistant ID. So assistant ID is one of the attributes, instant attributes of the GPT assistant object. So you can immediately get the assistant ID. This is the assistant ID that is created inside the OpenAI backend. If you look at the client, so you can see that it is an OAI client. OAI is OpenAI client, and there is a wrapper on top of the client. You can take a look at the threads. So this is one of the important things that took some time to grab, because you for looking at the runs, looking at the messages, and what are the messages inside the thread, you need the thread ID. And this thread ID is actually hidden. It's a private attribute inside the GPT Assistant instance, and you can take a look at this and you will be able to get the thread ID here. This is a thread ID that we can use to further explore what has happened in the backend of OpenAI. If you go into the GPT Assistant OpenAI message, you can see the various messages the user proxy agent has sent. So this is the content that the user proxy agent sent, and then this is the content that we got from the assistant. This is the exit code sent by the user proxy agent, and this is the reply. So you can get the entire conversation back from the database, and also this particular conversation is locally available in your environment once you execute the code. In case in the future, if you are going to create a development where you are going to take this dictionary, and if you are going to place it in some other database or showing it somewhere, then you'll know how to get at this particular messages. Okay, that is only the starting part, but we still need to know the threads, the thread IDs, and the run, the entire the workflow that was automated. So we can create a client by using the OpenAI library. So we can import OpenAI class from OpenAI library, and then we can list the assistant. So if you list the assistants in your OpenAI API key, if you are given that, then you will be getting your assistant there. After that, you can retrieve the assistant used. You can get the assistant use name, and you can get the assistant use instruction. So this is the instruction that we gave to the assistant in the beginning, correct? So this is the same instruction that you can see at this location. If you go to the top, this assistant agent.default system message, this is the same instruction that you will see there also. And if you take a look at the documentation and in OpenAI, there also you'll see the same instruction. So it's all linked together. And then the thread ID. So you can retrieve the thread using the thread ID, and you can retrieve the runs using the thread ID, and you can look at the runs data by looking at the run list. So all these things. So if you look at the run data, it will have these messages, and it will have the replies that you saw in this message. So all these things you can actually look at it from the backend itself, and it is very powerful. Once you know what is going on, and on top of it, you know how to collect the information on the steps and the workflow, that gives you a very different sort of understanding of the entire system. This is one of the main thing that I urge, or I think, whenever I want to learn something new, because once you know the overview, as you see here, the draw.io extension that I'm using in VS Code helps me to visualize. So I am visualizing GPT Assistant User Proxy Agent. I can see that it is made of OpenAI Assistant, and it is also made of Autogen User Proxy Agent. These two are interacting using the GPT Assistant class, and this GPT Assistant class acts as the wrapper for the assistant creation workflow, and it has the interface for send and receive the messages, and also processing it. We have gone through the entire process right now, and we have understood the GPT Assistant and User Proxy Agent, the building blocks behind it. Where to go next? My immediate next step will be to interface the open source model like CodeLlama 2 or Llama 2, and see how well the User Proxy Agent can interface with those open source models and provide a useful output. Once you are able to do that, you'll be able to work with a lot more things, because once you're able to have a local model, and you can actually attach vector databases, you can attach various functions, and you can also see what Autogen can give from the function calling perspective. So those things we will be seeing in the next couple of videos. I believe that you have learned a thing or two from this discussion, and do subscribe to my channel for further updates. With that said, I would like to leave with 4 words, that is automate, automate, practice, practice. See you guys. Have a great time.